Hello and welcome to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech into one place. I'm Suvi Loponen, and no, I've not taken over the podcast fully alone this week, but I have with me Dave Rome. Hello Dave, how are you doing this week?
Hey Suvi, I'm well. You've taken the reins. This is it's exciting.
I'm trying, because I've been dragged from watching the Bake Off to do this, so I need to.
Yeah, Suvi said, I'm only turning off the Bake Off if I can host. And I went, all right, we'll compromise. This is allowed. So here we are.
And Brad Copeland is also back with us this week. Brad, where were you last week?
Where was I last week? Oh, I had some travel conflicts involving my wife as well, and it's not a great answer or a great excuse. So I was trying not to tell it, but since you asked, I was just unable to make the time at the time we needed to make. So I apologize, but I thought about it and I regretted it, and I'm glad to have been able to join you this week again.
Well, we are glad to have you because there's lots of topics to talk about. And I think some of the actual Ask the Wrench questions this week are going to be very interesting from Brad's perspective. Well, we've got a full crew, and yeah, let's just get into this week's topics because we've got quite a lot of things to cover, and they are this week not headset related.
We'll find a way.
Yeah. We'll steer it in that direction.
Not all of it, hopefully. Right. Okay. Let's get into it then. So first off, we've got a couple of bigger news bits to chat about. Starting off with the news from Campagnolo. I should be really good at pronouncing that after last week. Or well, these are actually rumors, not exactly confirmed news yet, from the Italians. So there's a new patent floating about that seems to suggest that there is a thumb shifter coming back from Campagnolo. And yeah, there's a few other interesting bits to this patent too. Some, in my opinion, look like they would belong in the hospital ward rather than into a bike shifter. But Dave, do you want to tell a little bit more about what is going on with this patent?
Yeah, I mean, to rewind a bit, I mean, Campagnolo sort of, its shifter ergonomics were iconic with having a thumb shifter that sent the shifting in one direction, and then the paddle behind the brake lever that sent the shifting in the other direction. And when they introduced EPS, their electronic shifting, they kept with that layout. They had the thumb shifter and then they had the paddle shifter, and it felt familiar for anyone coming from Campagnolo mechanical from the previous many generations and decades worth of group sets before it. The most recent release of EPS, they went Super Record wireless, and they got rid of that thumb shifter. There is a little button that you can configure to do it, but it's just not the same. And I think in the market, they've had quite a bit of backlash over this, that a lot of Campagnolo loyalists are like, well, you've removed the feature that we loved most with the product. And so I think it makes sense that we're now seeing a patent floating back up to the top of perhaps suggesting that they're looking at reintroducing such a thing, and that thumb shifter may do more than it ever did before. It looks like it could be shifting both up and down the cassette, in addition to having that paddle shifter behind the brake lever. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things here. Brad, have you played with the latest wireless Super Record?
Not really. I don't, I hate to say it, but the truth is you don't see much of it. And that's kind of been, I would say, a trend for Campy since unveiling electronic group sets about a decade ago. Compared to the other options in the category, it seems like fewer and fewer people are choosing the Campy one. I'm among those who was chagrined by the disappearance of the mouse ear, the little thumbie. I loved it. Before electronics, it was quite a actually interesting feature because it was one of the few groups that allowed multiple shifts to harder gears, many at a time in one sweeping motion. 4 or 5 shifts at a full push of the thumb all the way through its range of motion. So it was quite a novelty, not just for the ergonomics and the kind of general appearance of Campy road shift levers, shift brake levers, but had quite a, utility as well in terms of what it represented. So, but yes, definitely iconic, definitely missed. And in this case, perhaps a response to the remaining loyalists, let's say, those who still would entertain the thought of purchasing one of these group sets, I kind of found it a little bit funny that it disappeared because, for something that's as simple as a button, not to simplify it too much, but it seems like kind of oversight on their part to have eliminated it from the newest generation of the Super Record EPS or Super Record Wireless. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it does, it came from the fact that they're trying to reduce the size and weight of the shifter, and having a lever, levers on opposite sides of the shifters would surely add to the bulk of the thing and add complexity. And I think, electronic, that it did allow them to rethink and hang on, we just need a button, not a whole lever. But it does feel like that was one of their key unique selling features that they perhaps took too much of a gamble on. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But also part of that patent, and something we've actually seen some other brands do or put patents out there for, is a wearable shifter. Suvi, what's going on with this thing?
I genuinely am not entirely sure what is going on with it, because it looks, what I was referring to earlier, it looks like one of those devices that you get put on your finger at a hospital.
Yeah.
I think it measures your heart rate and something else, oxygen levels or some sort. So yeah, there's a device like that goes on one of your fingers, in the very same pattern, and somehow that device can also shift gears, it seems, to put all the patent jargon into a very short version.
That makes sense to me for the niche application of time trial, maybe triathlon, although the time spent putting your shifter on and off your finger is probably time wasted in that sport. But yeah, I don't know, it feels like an odd thing, but who knows? If you can put it on your thumb, then you could probably also put it into your bar tape. So maybe it's just that tech can be applied in other ways.
What if it falls off? I think that's what I'm thinking. What?
And every rider that rides over your thumb shifter from there on just starts shifting your gears for you.
You won't need the Shimano setup to change the remote gears remotely. You just need one of these.
I dropped my shifter will be a whole new excuse in modern cycling.
Who knows?
It's a new way of getting dropped.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if there's much else to say about this one, but it seems interesting. Do you think it's going to be a road or gravel application for this?
For the shifter with the thumb shifter, with the paddle, or the actual wearable shifter?
I guess both. I get you mentioned TT for the wearable one, but
yeah, I think the wearable stuff is probably more patent wars in terms of have an idea and defend the idea and stop others from using it. I don't really know the commercial appeal of that one yet. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll figure that out. But I do think bringing the thumb paddle, or what did you call it, Brad? The mouse ear?
That's what we always called that little thummy on the shifter. Yeah.
Yeah, bringing that back to the shifter feels like it might be the sort of thing that could win back some of Campagnolo's most loyal customers. I'm certainly seeing it in the market here. I used to work for a really high-end bike shop. This is many years ago, but I used to work for a very high-end bike shop that did a lot of Pinarello dogmas with a lot of early generation Campagnolo EPS. What I'm seeing is a lot of those customers who have been on Campagnolo through all the generations of mechanical, then into super record EPS, budget's not a concern. They love Campagnolo. This latest generation, when they're getting new bikes now, I'm seeing pretty much all of them switching over to Durace. A few on SRAM, but I just do not see this new group set, this new Super Record wireless group set in use. It just seems like it's kind of missed the mark amongst Campagnolo's most loyal customers. So yeah, it to me, it makes perfect sense that they would try to reverse things a little bit and try win back those customers that they seemingly have lost. So yeah, I don't want Campagnolo to fail, and I wish them all the luck, and I think they need to do something like this to help their story. That
and sponsor a world tour team again, I think would be a step in the right direction to prove their capabilities with their new technology. I mean, not that it's 100% authentic when a sponsored team wins on a product and an athlete is paid to race on it, but it does certainly present it in such a way that it kind of seems superior or not, regardless of that aspect. But a few podcasts ago, we were joined by Ronan, Dave, and as former Campy enthusiasts, all of us, none of whom still use it, we wanted a new mechanical group from Campy, and I still would say that would be the most welcomed and most surprising product launch if they were to drop something like that out of the blue. Again, a new super record mechanical I would find that more appealing than anything.
Indeed. But yeah, I mean, so many bikes don't support mechanical shifting.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
We'll just need to wait and see. It might be this patent.
Indeed.
There's loads of patents there, and they will never come to fruition. So this might be just a patent. It will never become reality.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yep. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. I look forward to trying the little thumb shifter thing, the wearable. Anyway, next up, we're going to move to pick one. We're actually going to do handlebars, but specifically drop handlebars. And I'm very curious in what you guys have picked. I think we're going to do separate ones. You can pick one for both disciplines, road and gravel, if you want. And you can tell why you love the handlebar that you love. Dave, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, before we pick one, should we chat about the broader topic of drop handlebars?
We can.
Yeah, because there's obviously a lot of, it's almost like a saddle. Like there's a lot of personal preference in the shape of the drop and the dimensions and whether it even fits your bike these days. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a nuanced topic these days, especially given how many of the latest bikes are now using like what's effectively a proprietary handlebar, and you kind of increasingly you have to use what you're given in a sense, rather than actually have the choice of picking a handlebar that in the past you might have liked. So I feel like times have changed here. But for me, like when I'm picking a handlebar, I look predominantly to width and the reach of the handlebar, and then also drop shape, the things I'm looking at. So for me, I truly personally prefer like shorter reach handlebars. So that's sort of the distance from the flat top out to your hoods. And yeah, I think a lot of bars on bikes a lot of race bars are like in that 85 millimeter range. And for me, I prefer like 70 to 75 millimeter reach bars. I just, especially with the way hoods with hydraulic disc brakes have gotten longer since we had mechanical brakes, I don't feel like we need that extra distance in the handlebar. And I'm not very flexible and forever injured. So yeah, I'm very mindful of that I don't like long reach handlebars, because then I have to make up that extra length by going with a short stem, and it gets funky at that point. So that's probably the main thing I'm looking at. And that actually narrows it down quite a lot. You end up with only like 10 handlebars to choose from in the whole market. And then from there, you can narrow it down further by, I narrow it down further by looking at the drop shape and then the width. And then I start to look at things like, I start to get obsessive about things like the ride quality of a handlebar. I think that's really overlooked often. I've said this before on the podcast, but you know, our bikes have gotten really stiff. Like we've got these big oversized bearings in the head tubes now, big stiff forks that are designed to resist flex from disc brakes. And I think we've lost some comfort through the frame and frame set over the years from where we used to be. And for me, I now look out for like handlebars with a little bit of flex to try earn back some of that comfort. So I'm all about carbon handlebars these days for that reason. But it's worth noting that not all carbon handlebars are compliant or flexible. Some are actually stiffer than aluminium handlebars. So then it, kind of comes down to experience of knowing which ones are a little bit flexible and paying attention to that. So yeah, Brad, anything to add on that topic before we actually pick one?
You know, I could add a few things.
Please do.
But I have a couple points I'd like to make. These might be pseudo counterpoints, but not entirely disagreeing, and in some cases reinforcing your claims. I will just start by saying I spent the last 4 or 5 years riding Scott road and gravel bikes. And to your point about having no other option but what you're given, those bikes had a 1 1/4 inch steerer tube on the fork, which drastically reduces the number of options available in the handlebar, especially the one-piece handlebar, integrated handlebar space. And, you know, those bikes have kind of integrated spacers and stem shapes that also blend into the frame shape. And I wouldn't really want to change it anyway, because it compromises the integration and the aesthetic of that to a degree. So we have often talked about this in terms of like headsets and certain quality aspects that maybe have diminished somewhat due to the integration that is now so prevalent among almost all bikes out there, at least above a certain price point. And I think that's actually true of handlebars too, from some brands, not all. But to your point, where some bars now lack compliance or a forgiving or sort of damped ride quality. I think some brands, especially when you're stuck with the kind of stock, or at least the stock kind of within the options you may have of like spec of width and length, that may be changeable, but otherwise you're kind of stuck. And so you may be stuck with a handlebar that isn't particularly compliant, because some of those bars I feel like are not necessarily made to the high quality of like an aftermarket bar that you might purchase for those characteristics that you're talking about, Dave, and some bars are kind of like a heavy layup, like a really thick, kind of unfinished, kind of cheap-ish carbon that's like very resiny and not like too smooth and clean on the inside, and may weigh quite a bit more than a traditional bar and stem. And so
made to a price.
Yeah, made to a price. And sometimes the actual performance is compromised somewhat by that. I also think too that not too much time spent, you can get kind of used to almost any handlebar shape, as long as it's within this sort of size range that you're comfortable with. A few kind of differences in the drop by a few millimeters or the reach by a few millimeters, I don't think that's insurmountable. I think that sometimes people get caught up in numbers a little bit too much, where 3 or 4 rides you could easily kind of make a few tweaks to where your hoods are on the bar and feel pretty good with a new shape or a new handlebar. So in that sense, I don't know that it really matters if you don't have that many options. Sometimes I think you can, if you can get your head around it, you can adjust yourself to a handlebar rather than having to adjust the handlebar to you. So
sure. Yeah. And I think like on that point, like a lot of the latest bikes coming out have sort of converged on a very similar drop design.
Yeah, that's true.
Like none of them are using like a traditional shape with like, a long flat section that has an awkward, that puts the brake levers quite far away when you're trying to reach them. Like they've all sort of converged on like a compact / ergonomic shape. And there's not a lot of variance there. Like there is variance in how deep that shape is or the radius of it and all that. But yeah, as you say, like most of them have figured it out, but there are still, nuance to it, and some do it better than others. And again, it comes back to, it is often highly personal. The person that designed that bar probably loves it that they made, and maybe it just doesn't work for the rest of the population. But yeah, I think we have sort of come round to a point where there's a pretty decent understanding of a handlebar shape that works for most people, but that doesn't mean it works for everyone. Suvi, you've I believe you're quite small-handed. Do you have any thoughts to add on the topic of drop shape and all that?
I mean, you've covered it all. I thought we're just going to jump into pick one.
Okay.
No.
Sure. All right.
No, I think there's definitely been good developments, but what you've said, I would kind of echo it. I would not agree with Brad, though, that they've nailed the handlebar shape.
Okay.
And that you adjust to it. I really struggle with current integrated one-piece cockpits, because I feel like they're barely ever the right width and stem length for me, and then changing that is a pain. So yeah, I'd say it's still complicated. I think the actual handlebar drop shape and those have gone better, and definitely improvements have been made a lot from brands in making the reach better, especially under drops, that it's easier to actually stretch your fingers or to the reader, to the brake levers.
How much of that do you think is in the handlebar, and how much of that do you think is in modern shifters allowing you to bring the brake levers in?
I think, I don't know a percentage, but I think it definitely, it's both. It's a combination, I would say, because definitely certain bars with certain shifters work a lot better, and 100% modern shifters are better than the older ones. And I think electronic shifters, maybe I'd say, I find slightly easier to reach than mechanical, which might be, I've been riding more older mechanical stuff than new. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that mechanical shifters were definitely a compromise for small people in general, and finding a good brake like bite point that allows clearance for your fingers behind the brake lever, but you can still reach it, but it's not so far away, that it's a struggle to reach the shift portion of the lever. That was always a really big challenge, I remember, when working with smaller riders. And so that's definitely something I think that the modern current era of the shift levers that we, at least at the top end, that have all the features for adjustment that you would want, really took into account to make them more approachable to riders of all sizes, which I think is a great improvement.
It is. Cool. With that overview of handlebars, do you have favorite handlebars that you picked?
Sure. Brad, do you want to share yours?
Well, my favorite handlebar, and last time I had to pick a favorite mountain bike handlebar, you didn't like it because it was too expensive, Dave. So just hold on to your seat. I'm a big fan of THM as a brand in general. They make a beautiful one-piece bar called the Frontale. It's an integrated one. It's not the most expensive one out there, Dave. Envy makes one that costs a little bit more, in fact. And it's like, you wouldn't think I was silly for picking an Envy product, I'm sure. But it's a little bit Gucci, and it's, it definitely costs more than $1,000 for a front end, which is a lot of money, but it weighs 220 grams or so. And it's a beautiful thing. And so that's my favorite bar without any other consideration other than just its sheer beauty and kind of the high quality of its manufacturer, and German carbon products are always very nice, and this is no exception. So
no slight at THM with this question, but do you trust your teeth to it?
I do. I would 100%. Yes.
Cool. Okay.
And I did want to bring up one point, something that we talk about in the shop on a semi-regular basis and that I experienced. And I just want to bring this up. Maybe if there's anyone in the industry listening, listen up. Okay. I was just swapping the front end on a Cervelo S5, which, speaking of bikes that have only, it has like a twin spar stem, sort of like a stem that comes up, and then you bolt a bar directly to, it's like a V-shaped stem protrusion, and you bolt a flat, a bar. So you can kind of change the dimensions of both of those two elements and create a integrated front end, but it's not just a one piece. So that's what we were doing. We're changing the bar and the V-shaped stem-like element. And I was able to remove, it was a SRAM equipped bike. So this probably wouldn't have worked on a Shimano equipped bike because of the shape of the compression nut that fastens the disc hose to the lever. But I was able to pull the entire compression nut and olive and barb attached to the hose through the base bar, the handlebar, through the integrated, like the hole in it, so it could be routed through it, and then feed it back through, never having to cut the fittings off and remove the compression nut, which is an added source of both a headache and a mess oftentimes when you're trying to do these operations, which are often kind of a three-handed job anyway. And so that was kind of the first time a handlebar that I've been working on actually could accommodate that much extra bit, not just the hose itself, but the hose with all the fittings still on it, pull it through and feed it back through without too much of a headache. And that's something that I always thought should be brought into somebody's consideration when engineering these products, because if you're swapping stuff around, it takes like another 30 minutes. If you have to cut those fittings, you'll definitely have to bleed them then, fully, probably, most likely. And
sorry, what handlebar was that?
So it was the Cervelo S5 stock handlebar, which is, it has its own purpose built, specifically shaped to designed handlebar kind of. So you don't really get to choose a handlebar.
Spaceship cockpit.
Yeah, exactly. And often those spaceship type cockpits are the worst ones, but this actually did have, I was able to do that. And
Interesting.
when I was finished, I really appreciated it, and it made an impression on me. And I thought, that is something I wish more people did. So maybe they will.
Good for Cervelo.
Yeah.
Excellent work. Is that your one preferred handlebar?
THM handlebar is my preferred handlebar of all handlebars, just because it's the one that I feel is most beautiful and well made and sort of minimalist, but still sturdy enough to actually ride with confidence. And it's just a high quality piece. That's my pick.
And that's a one-piece item with a stem, is it?
It is. They make the the two-piece option exists as well, but
sure.
It's my pick, so I'm picking the one piece.
Gotcha.
Pick that one. You get a stem as well.
Yeah, see, smart. Twofer.
Do you have a standalone handlebar that you also really like, Brad? Or you're all about the one-piece cockpits now?
I've been about the one-piece cockpit since before it was cool. In like 2001, I had a Chinelli Ram 2 handlebar on the Seiko replica Cannondale team bike. It was like the R6000 or whatever they called it at the time, and it was it was a super record, or it was a Campy Record 10. There was no super record that year. It was a record equipped bike with a Chinelli one-piece with like this really Gucci kind of decal job to match the team kind of color scheme. It was something else. So I've been on this game. I had also on my R5CA, the bike we like to bring up time and again. I shipped one out. If you know the company Calfee Design, it's a California-based carbon manufacturer. Used to make the Le Mans branded bikes.
Also known for bamboo bikes. For
bamboozling the industry with their bamboo. You could ship them a carbon bar of your choice, and they would mate it to like the stem extension. It was an Envy manufactured stem without a faceplate, and they would mold to your specified rotation and length of whatever bar you want. And I happened to treat myself to one of those when I was putting that bike together back in like 2012. I always thought the aesthetic of a one piece was beautiful, but you have to really go for it and take the time to figure out the dimensions, because obviously you're committing. So, but that's who I am, and that's how I roll.
Okay, very cool.
Dave, what's yours?
Road handlebar. I'm going to just stick with a traditional 31.8 round handlebar recommendation. For road, favorite handlebar at the moment is probably the Easton EC90 SLX. It sort of ticks all the boxes in terms of shape for me, and then also has it's light, but it's also has a little bit of detectable tuned flex, so has a nice ride quality without being overly flexible. So that's the pick. Not a cheap handlebar by any means, but yeah, I've sort of had pretty solid results with those, and I've used a few generations of them, and I've even currently got a bike with the latest generation, and I really like that handlebar. So I'm going to say that one. There are other bars that I would also consider. Like if I wanted an aluminium bar, I've often used the Zip Service Course SL70 is the bar that I've put on many bikes in the past for as a more budget friendly option. So worth considering. But yeah, if you're chasing a smoother ride quality, then Carbon and Easton's one that comes to mind as having done a bar that rides smoother. So that's me. Suvi, do you have a favorite road handlebar?
Well, I'm completely budget on my road bars. I think on the road I would often ride a 36 bar, or a 37 is my preferred, and it's sometimes a bit tricky to find that narrow of a bar. In a lot of handlebars don't come in that. They start at 38. I've been riding a lot with the specialized, whatever it costs, £40 short reach bar, which is 65 reach. Just a very classic shape, not much drop. I really like that. It comes in the S-Works version as well, I think, in carbon version, which is a lot more expensive, but I think you only should save, 20 grams, if even that, in weight. Comfort-wise, maybe more. But yeah, I'm a total budget person when it comes to handlebars, and not enough. Wanting to go for one piece. I would not go for that, because I feel like I sometimes just want to change things up, and especially if you're swapping between bikes, you can just swap handlebars and you can do everything. Whereas you go one piece, you can't necessarily do that. Also, the Zip handlebar that you mentioned, the Service Course SL70, I really, really like that one as well. A bit of flair. Yeah. And I do prefer a little bit of flair on road bars as well. I know the Specialized doesn't have it, but just a tiny bit, which I feel is a coming trend. It's coming more and more, like a little flair. It's great. I'm not a huge fan of the gravel bars that are extremely flared. I just don't really understand what am I meant to do with it.
Yeah, I agree. A little bit of subtle flare doesn't bother me, but I think anything more than 6 to 8 degrees on the road gets too much. And then for me, I actually like gravel handlebars with like roughly 12 degrees of flare, and anything more I start to not really love as much. I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to obviously add stability at the drops and also put your wrists in a more natural position, but it just feels odd after having been on sort of traditional handlebars for most of my life. So yeah, again, personal preference.
definitely.
So do you have a favorite gravel bar then?
Me, I would say it's actually there's a Service Cars their gravel version which does have a flare and everything. Yeah, that would be my preferred. I'm not too fussy with handlebars as long as it's the right width, which is my biggest issue. I barely ever seem to get the right width handlebar in stock bikes, so I have to swap them. And then if it is like you talked about earlier, if it is a one-piece proprietary cockpit, it is a nightmare to swap things around, and it's a very costly experience as well if you do have to pay someone to do all that and buy the new parts for your new bike. So
yeah, no, I fully agree on that. And my I guess my pick for a gravel handlebar is that zip's actually pretty good. I've even been using their latest carbon version, the Explore handlebar, and that is actually a pretty good bar. But once again, I'm going to be fussy and say that I, even more so in gravel than I do on road, the ride quality and flex of a handlebar matters quite a bit to me now. And right now, I'd say the Specialized Terra carbon handlebar is probably my pick of the bunch in terms of ticking all the boxes in terms of shape and dimensions, but then also having what is very obviously a nice smooth ride quality. So yeah, again, there are other bars that tick that box, but of the ones that I've used, I think that Roval bar is the one that I'd be picking for a personal bike. But there are, I don't know, I'm confused by this topic, and I'm sort of feeling a little bit lost because on gravel I have experienced hitting bumps, forces big enough to make a correctly torqued handlebar slip through the stem. And some stems I think are better than others. I'm not gonna get into this now because I need to do some actual testing on this, which might be difficult to do. But I think some popular stems are perhaps guilty of letting bars slip more than others. But given that slippage, I think there is reason and there is cause and benefit to one-piece handlebars, especially in off-road applications, specifically speaking of gravel and specifically speaking of drop handlebars, because being in the hoods and hitting something actually puts an incredible amount of load through that stem. And yeah, I think one-piece is worth considering for those that are forever having, slipping issues or straining the limits of two-piece setups. But then why I'm a bit lost on the topic is that you then get into really nuanced elements of like the one-piece bars don't allow you to have any control over the bar angle, but your head tube angle affects that bar angle. So you kind of run into this issue that if you've got this great one-piece cockpit, is the bar angle that it's set at correct for the bike you're putting it on? Because the head angle will impact that. So this is where my head goes on these sort of topics that I think hopefully people will now be stressing about. And I'm sorry to everyone that hadn't thought of that previously.
Maybe just think about checking your stem bolts before you head out on gravel. Yeah,
so I've just made everyone unsure of every setup they could possibly use. My job here is done.
Excellent work. We picked our handlebars. We're going to have a little break before we go into Ask a Wrench. So our first question is from Gabriel, who was on his trainer while he sent this lovely message to us. So it was a little bit hard to make sense of. But what Gabriel was asking us is, he obviously loved what we do, which is great to hear. Thank you for that. But what he was interested to hear is how you got to where you are as a bike mechanic. So your career path to become a bike mechanic. I cannot speak of that because I'm not an actual qualified bike mechanic. I've got some qualifications, but not as much as you guys do. So which one of you want to go first? How did you get to being bike mechanics? What does it take?
I think fundamentally it takes a passion for fixing things and working on bikes. I think you have to love all kinds of bikes and cycling in general. And I think you have to be fascinated by the tech is the fundamental. And I think if you don't have that, then there's more lucrative and easier pathways to earning a living. Yeah, I think that's pretty fundamental. And I think from there, like, it's honestly, it really depends where you live, I think is going to be the correct answer to this. In Europe, in certain parts of Europe, you have to go through official education to become a bike mechanic. You need to get basically mechanic training, and it's basically college, and you need to get certified in that regard, and then that would make you employable. In the US, there are mechanic schools that you could do, or you could, and some bike shops only hire people that have certifications from those schools. But fundamentally, it's also, a lot of people are working in the industry just with nothing more than hands-on experience, and that, truthfully, in my opinion, counts more. And yeah, the same applies for like in Australia. It's all about hands-on experience that gets you jobs, or a willingness to learn. So yeah, with that vague answer, I'd say the path is start with working on your own stuff and figure out whether it's something you actually want to do. And once you've got that far, then try find a local shop that is willing to take you on and employ you and show you the ropes. They need to have an experienced mechanic on staff for you to learn from, and yeah, hopefully nurture you and let the experience come in that way. Maybe start a few days a week and start be humble about it and be willing to take a very junior salary, or you might even, if they don't have availability and you don't have a lot of shops in your area, you might even need to just start on a volunteer basis and just help out on weekends for a little while and show your interest in wanting to become a mechanic. And hopefully after a month or two of doing that, you can actually get some work. But yeah, it's going to depend on where you are and what the local requirements are as well. Brad, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I agree with you, Dave. I would say if you have some mechanical aptitude, even if it is more or less restricted to only the bikes that you own, there's a lot of nuance to it, but a lot of concepts are shared as well. And so if you have a mind for it and the interest, you may find that a shop would be willing to take you on as like in the, during peak busy time of the year when they need some hands, and you might not be doing the most thrilling jobs at first, but jobs that you can accomplish successfully without making mistakes and wasting time, fixing your own mistakes or to make it correct after you change the tube and flattened it in the process, installing the new one, that kind of thing. So, yeah, depending on your aptitude, your age, and where you are, I was personally very fortunate to, I got started in a bike shop when I was 12 years old, and happened to kind of just wander in and be really interested and be very well educated through all the magazines I was reading at the time, and memorizing every imaginable nuanced detail, kind of to the point of distraction in some ways, where now as a mechanic, I don't fuss over some of that fluff as much. And it's not really as important as I used to think that it was, and but they could tell I had a strong interest in a really deep capacity for the knowledge and the details. And so they took a chance on me as a young guy, and I happened to be, just by sheer happenstance, in some shops with some very talented guys that not only were talented and good at it, but also had the patience for somebody like me to learn from, and took the time actually to show me the way, not just sort of throw things at me and, see what I could do, but actually take the appropriate measures to see that I was doing it correctly, and instill some of those fundamental and foundational skills that I still use now. All these years later, I've been doing this for almost 27 years, in some way or another. And, it's, I'm still learning stuff all the time, but I'm also still referencing things I learned 27 years ago, so, it's one of those skills that, especially like it's not very well paid, and there aren't that many like formal educational opportunities to really learn it, because everything is, every situation in the bike shop is a little bit different, and it requires a lot of improvisation. You have the skills, but you have to kind of adapt them once in a while to the situation. People aren't bringing in bikes that are working well, ever to the bike shop. There's something wrong. And so you have to be pretty quick in order to actually be profitable in a bike shop. You can't waste too much time or do things over and over to get it right. You have to be pretty dialed, and that only comes through exposure, and repetition. And so you kind of have to put in a lot of time to, I think, arrive at a place in a bike shop where you can make a pretty good living, or you are valued by the shop and compensated appropriately. So you may have to, like Dave said, be a little bit humble at first. If it's a true interest, take the time that it takes to really become valuable. And it's kind of a lifelong experience, but it's potentially it can be very, very fun and rewarding. So, it's taken me all over the place. So I'm really grateful for what I've been able to learn and get to do because of my interests in bicycle mechanics. But it does take time, and you do have to, take your knocks too for a while.
Do you think it's changed, Brad and Dave? I mean, you've been in there for a long time as well. That say 20 years ago, if you wanted to become a bike mechanic versus now, because I would say it's maybe more. There's more qualifications nowadays. Like I've done mechanics training. I've never worked in a bike in a shop as a bike mechanic, but I've got some qualifications, so I've got those. But I feel there's more of that offered to people now, whereas before it would have been this kind of thing that you're just really interested in it and you just go in and you just do the job and you learn on the go. Whereas do you think that is the case that you would, now the requirement is that you'd have some sort of paper or something to show when you walk in looking for a mechanic's job? Especially, I think, in terms of teams, how do you get into being a team mechanic?
Well, let me just ask. I'll let Brad answer the team thing because he's actually done it. But I do think the qualification topic again comes back to where you are based. In Australia, we have some emerging qualification options. When I was first getting started, I could go through college and do an apprenticeship. But that course actually ended roughly when I was in the middle of it. So it was, so I mean that the government just stopped offering it, while like in Europe, it's almost, in certain parts of Europe, it's almost mandatory in order to work as a bicycle mechanic. So it really depends where you are. I think in the US, what I'm increasingly seeing is that sort of extra education happens once you're employed within a bike shop. You might go and do education with Shimano and SRAM and learn about the latest products there, or with Bosch, for example. Bosch goes around from state to state teaching dealers about its products and how to service its products, and all the safety regulations around that and the correct use and selling of the Bosch systems. So I think that's increasingly common, and that sort of education isn't available to someone that isn't already employed. So I think on-job education is becoming increasingly common. But Brad, I guess, I'll throw to you for how you get into team mechanics.
First, just to piggyback a bit on your answer too, in the US, there are a few locations like BTI, Bicycle Technical Institute, which is in, I think, Portland, if I'm not mistaken. And there are some other ones like it that are, in a physical location that you yourself would go to. And I don't think you have to be employed as a bicycle mechanic to participate by any means. So, having said that, I've known several people who've gone to them and they found it valuable. I would also say that the best mechanics I know have not and are not certified in any formal way. Me included. I have no formal certificate that says I know what I'm doing. But I have, a lot of years of experience doing it. And if you have the opportunity to demonstrate what you know, then oftentimes that, if you're seeking employment anywhere in a bike shop or with a team, if you can get in the door and can show that you can work efficiently, that you're organized in your mind and in your like workspace too, and can kind of anticipate the procedure and do it, basically blindfolded. If you can kind of show that, then that's a rare skill. And that's something, time is money in a bike shop for sure. If you can demonstrate your ability to kind of get things done well and do it in a, timely fashion, that goes a long way, no matter what the context of the work is. As for how to get into a team, that's also kind of location dependent for sure. I had a lot of, I think, good luck, good timing as well, right place at the right time kind of a situation. I had moved to California. I wanted to work at Specialized. I'd actually applied for many jobs at Specialized, living on the East Coast, since I graduated from college, and I never was hired. I had a few interviews, never really went anywhere. And I ended up, I had some connections eventually through the industry, through some bike shop, co-workers actually, who had gone out to California and, or knew somebody who had or who worked there, and was able to sort of pull some strings when I actually physically lived in California. And I finally moved out there, got into like Specialized sort of in-house bike shop, which like kind of serviced employee bikes, like magazine kind of review, journalist review type fleets of bikes, that kind of thing. A lot of demo bikes coming and going through Specialized. And so they need people to actually physically work on some bikes. And I happened to get an opportunity to do that. Through that opportunity, got to meet people from top to bottom at the company, all the way up to Mike Sinyard himself coming in there with issues with his bike that he needed to get sorted. And, so through that exposure, and I guess, at that point I'd had a number of years, more than 15 years experience already, and was able to kind of prove that I knew what I was doing. And happened that at that time, somebody left the racing program and they needed somebody to help out in the United States at some races. I had a lot of experience racing as well, both on road and mountain biking, and was especially interested in cross country, which is what this was. And so things kind of lined up for me. It took a while to get there, and some not glamorous years of life prior to that. But it took me on the road after that, and I've spent about a decade doing racing all over the world, doing World Cup cross country mountain bike racing. So once you're in, you're kind of in. It's a short list of people they call once they have, qualified people, and you'll often see that teams may change, but the people doing it are the same with a different shirt on, next year kind of thing. Kind of like with the riders too, so if you have a talented staff, those guys are in demand too, and it's hard to take a risk. You can't really afford to take a risk on someone with unproven credentials. And so if you've demonstrated it before, then there's a good chance you can get a job again. But yeah, that first foot in the door is the one that it's hard to say exactly how that works. It comes down to being pretty persistent and being willing to move and be flexible and take your knocks, as it were, for a while before you maybe get that opportunity. And then when you do, you have to really commit to it. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to commit to that lifestyle. But if you can, once you're in, and people remember you if you do a good job. So yeah, it's not an easy answer or an easy, straightforward path, but it's one that if you're persistent enough, you can certainly find a way to make a career as a bike mechanic.
I'd say from what Brad says, a lot from what I know in the UK, that's exactly how it is. I mean, the cycling industry is quite a small world. Even if you start on the shop floor in a shop, you'll probably get to do a few puncture fixes, and then if you're just really enthusiastic and you really want to get your hands on things, you are given the opportunity, especially in smaller bike shops. I think that's a key if you want to become a bike mechanic here. Don't go for the chains, because they're very likely going to split things, and they're not necessarily going to even do the kind of bigger repairs in the workshop. Yeah, and yeah, so it's good to get started, and charities and there's loads of different opportunities to get started and get experience. I just love tinkering at home.
A final thought on this. Yeah, a final thought on this before we move on, which is start humble and try stay humble. I say this as increasingly and this may just be because I spend too long on Instagram, but I see a lot of mechanics who don't come across as humble in their ways, and perhaps start to think they know better. And I just think cycling is broad enough, and the technology swings fast enough that it's not possible for one person to be an expert at everything in cycling. And there's always something new to learn, and just remember that you'll be a better mechanic for it if you keep your eyes open and you stay willing to continue to learn. There's always a better way to do something, and there's always newer information out there. So that's probably my lesson out to everyone working on their own bike, and also the professionals out there, is keep in mind you can't possibly know it all.
That's a good last sentiment on it. Right, move on to chains. Next question we have is from David Walker, asking about chain compatibility.
I have a question about SRAM chains, specifically the T-type flat top chain and the red flat top chain. I'm wondering, because I have both the Explorer 13-speed and the Transmission 12-speed that I switch between on my gravel bike, and all the dimensions of the chains are identical, but SRAM's website says that you should only use the red one with Explorer and the T-type with the transmission, because the coatings on the chains are different, and that somehow will make them not work or be incompatible. I'm wondering, on your opinion on this, do you think that's true or not? It doesn't make much sense to me, but I'd like to get a more educated opinion than myself. Thanks a lot. Keep up the good work, guys. Bye.
Good question, Dave. This is a sort of a new concept for all of us to sort of wrap our minds around. With kind of in a few short years, SRAM really reinventing the wheel, as it were, with their chains and their transmission and their new Explorer group and on and on. And it's required the bike industry to kind of modify some of its tool standards to be able to work on these chains. And so it is a bit confusing. And you're right that the dimensions of both the flat top and the T-type, which is the mountain bike transmission chain, are the same. SRAM claims, and it stands to reason, that the mountain bike, the T-type chain, is a stronger chain than the road version, and as such, they do not recommend using the road chain on the mountain bike. It's also not recommended that you go the other way, where you put the transmission chain on the road bike, as you found out in your research. But it does seem that it would be completely doable. It may not perform quite as perfectly as the intended chain does, but there's no real dimensional reason that it would not work. I would certainly not recommend putting the road chain on the mountain bike for any reason. But if for some reason you needed to put a transmission T-type chain on your road bike, it will work. It won't cause massive failures or any major problems for you. But if you are switching between a transmission derailleur and an Explorer derailleur, corresponding cassettes and chains, your chain length is most likely going to be different too. So I think in the end, you'll find that this is sort of a moot point, and you will need to have both chains anyway, because you'll need two chains of two different lengths to work with your two different group set options. I think in the end, my recommendation would just be to use the one that is specified and recommended, and you'll have the least concerns. But if for some reason you found yourself in a pinch and you needed to, let's say, put a random chain from your garage on your road bike for some reason, and all you had was that T-type one lying around, it will work for you, no problem.
So just to add a little bit more information on this, because I've pushed SRAM on this topic in the past, and they remained a bit coy on it. But basically, yeah, as Brad said, there are different coatings to these chains from what I understand. So the T-type chains pretty much only use what they call hard chrome, which is like a more durable coating, and it's designed to be more resistant to dirt and grit and all that. Whereas on the flat top side of things and the road side of things, they do have cheaper chains that lack that hard chrome coating. Honestly, I think this is more the marketing team getting involved in things and saying it gets too complicated from a compatibility discussion to say, you can use flat top on your transmission, but not this, not an apex chain. It has to be a force chain or higher because you need the hard chrome. I think it's just easier for them just to split it and say flat top works with flat top with road and Explorer, and T-type is for mountain bike, and that's it. But yeah, I think realistically you do have the ability to swap and change a bit more if you need to, but you realistically shouldn't have to. The other complicating thing here is chain length. T-type or transmission mountain bike starts with I believe it's 126 link chain, and then SRAM actually tells you specifically for your bike and for the chainring size you're using how many links you need to remove in order to size that chain, whereas road bikes tend to be a bit more using old school chain sizing methods. So I think there's something also there that they don't want that confusion in market, where someone might actually start with a flat top chain and not have enough links in the chain to fit their transmission, and then they botch it, and then the group set gets a bad name out of misuse. So again, I think it's just marketing messaging being really clear that the mountain bike chain is the right number of lengths, it's the right coating, so stick with that for the mountain bike, and then the road chain has its own nuances. But yeah, as Brad said, if you're in a pinch, they are cross-compatible. So take that information as you will.
And our last question is from Mike, straight from his morning dog walk.
My question relates to, I guess, things we've been speaking about over the last few weeks on Geek Warning. The cost to the consumer after the bike's bought. Do we think it's time the bike industry, or I dare say bike shops, but they might lose some sales from it, start opening up and be honest about the ongoing costs of servicing? I'm an independent mechanic, and many of my customers have no idea that the swanky new aero-optimized road bike they've spent all their hard-earned money on is going to cost them, £200-300 just to change a headset bearing, or someone who's saved up their hard-earned money and now smashing a high-end mountain bike that the cassette is the thick end of £200-300 to change when the chain wears out. The car industry seems to have an accepted amount of cost in their servicing that the consumer kind of understands? Is it just education that's missing, or does the bike industry need to do something? It'd be great to hear your thoughts, and yeah, thanks for everything, and I love the content, and keep it coming.
Thanks, Mike. Fully agree, and I mean, truthfully, it's for me, like every review I do this is like in the back of my mind, and something that I'm strongly trying to point out to customers over, whether the bike is easy to service and what they probably should expect if they buy into the bike. I think it's a really critical point. And I mean, unfortunately, like, Escape Collective is a medium-sized outlet, but our reach is not enormous and isn't getting through to the masses. And so I mean, this information, it's just a matter of anyone that does reviews hopefully picking up on this sort of theme and doing it more. And honestly, if I'm being brutally honest, I don't see it done very often in reviews. I think it's vastly overlooked, and it is an increasingly important element. I think there is a complete lack of consumer awareness. There is a complete lack of bike shops being transparent about this. I think that's improving, but again, I don't think someone that's about to sell someone a new Trek or Specialized or Giant is going to be like, oh, by the way, just expect to pay 10% of the bike's cost yearly to have it serviced. I think they keep that to themselves. So yeah, I think it's about everyone that works in the industry, whether it's media or mechanics or brands, just being a little bit more open about this. And I think it'll take time. And I think fundamentally it's really going to be up to the people on the ground. Media talking to customers directly, or bike shops and bike shop mechanics talking to customers directly, to be more open about this and to set expectations around this, because it is becoming a problem. It is increasingly becoming a problem. I think the more people know of this, then maybe their purchases might be swayed to simpler products that don't have these issues. Brad, Suvi, thoughts on that?
Well, I have some thoughts, and we often will talk about things along these lines on this podcast, and kind of even today when I was celebrating the Cervelo handlebar, that I could route the brake hose fittings through the bar for the first time in my life, without having to cut them and then reinstall new ones just to do a handlebar swap. I feel like the industry is not really considering some of these things when they're designing the products in the first place, and it's a bit frustrating. It's a little bit frustrating sometimes to work on the bikes. And Suvi was kind of mentioning, I almost spoke up earlier about if I started now with bikes like they are now versus like they were then when I did start working on bikes, would I still have been as passionate and interested? Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes the work is quite tedious, and I don't know, it's just not as fluid and sometimes not as intuitive as I would like for it to be, and becomes kind of like I said, a three-handed job when, of course, we have only two, and that makes things a little bit more tricky. And so I think that it would be prudent to inform people because it is only through, I think, voting with your wallet, as they like to say, that people can kind of influence what industries do. If people stop buying bikes that are really complex, or unfortunately, what I think they're doing is just not servicing their bikes as much, rather than avoiding bikes or seeking bikes that are simpler, let's say. So I think it's actually having a sort of an extra bad kind of secondary complication, not just that it's expensive, but that in lieu of accepting the expense or the complication of the job, people just don't do it, and they avoid it. We talk about things. Yeah, they avoid it, and then you have this very expensive product. I mean, the bikes also cost a whole lot more than they used to, but you're not getting the full value out of it or the full utility out of it, because you are sometimes neglecting necessary maintenance or kind of avoiding the necessary maintenance that is required to keep what a modern bike is, up and running and functional and perfectly adjusted. So, some improvements have been made in certain aspects of bikes to make them quite robust and resilient, like electronic shifting. It rarely requires adjustment. And if it does, it's usually not because of the parts themselves, but something has become bent or knocked out of alignment, like your derailleur hanger or something like that, or there's, worn parts, but it's not like frequently adjusting cable tension like you used to do. So things have gotten better, but things have also gotten worse. And it's certainly the case that a headset bearing replacement these days might cost you $200 to $300. That's very on like Mike said, that's right on the money with what we basically have to charge based on the time that it takes to do the job correctly. And it's seldom a straightforward process these days. And so it's important to have people who are in the industry who know how to actually do this stuff. And, that's a value in theory, but it's a value that I think people are still trying to wrap their minds around in terms of actually following through and paying for that. Because, if you've been in the game for a while, a headset adjustment may have cost you $15, back in 1999. And here it is where if you need to replace those same bearings now, the amount of work is quadruple or more what you have to do just to get in there and put it all back together again. So, I think that sometimes people may not be fully aware of that. And I think brands don't make a big fuss about the complexity. They try to show you how cool and integrated it is without talking about how maintenance intensive and sort of what a heavy job it becomes when it's time to do a service. So, it's something that we kind of beat this drum a lot on this podcast. And I appreciate, Dave, that's one thing about your reviews in particular is that you do speak about it from the perspective of what it's like to actually work on this thing truly, because no marketing material is going to do that. And if anything, it's going to talk about everything except that in order to persuade you to buy the product. So I'm hopeful that changes. I hope that we can effect some change, and, service oriented shops that don't have products to sell you, I think are a really good source of, true information, for better or worse, whether it's good news or bad news. They'll tell you exactly what the story is. But if you're in an environment where somebody is interested in selling you a new product, you may not get the same full picture of what ownership really looks like for that product.
Yep. I do think it's a big problem, like starting, it's fundamentally, Brad, you said this, it's fundamentally starting with the design of the bike. And there are a lot of bikes on the market today from, I'd say within the last 5 years, that have really been designed for sale and not for long-term ownership. There are some that are shockingly bad in terms of servicing. Like I was playing with fixing an e-bike the other day, and an Orbea, and I had to pull out the e-bike motor and the fork in order to replace the rear derailleur housing. That's just sucks. Like that's not good design. So on such a part that wears so quickly, and one bad stick will tear it. So yeah, I think we're at a point now where I think a lot of the blame needs to fall on the brands to do better and to make bikes that are actually made for easier servicing for more than 2 or 3 years of ownership at a time. Bikes that are actually designed to be here 10 years from now and still be good, because I think we've lost a lot of ground there as far as products go.
I think I'd say my 2 cents to that as well in terms of proprietary parts. I think especially in the e-bike segment of bikes, because there's constantly new batteries and motor designs coming out, the frames they're not compatible with the previous version. You cannot replace, if you got an e-bike from say 5 years ago, the new motor won't fit, and then they won't do the old motor anymore. All of these things as well, they just add. And I mean, how is the consumer meant to know that the next models that are coming in 2 years time, it's none of the parts that you're getting now, they're just not cross compatible? But this is not just bikes, it's components, everything. And I think as well, saying about kind of just the sheer cost of fitting the bike for you, that if you need a new handlebar, everything fitted to you, and the bike comes with a certain spec, you are going to spend a lot of money on that. Whereas before you would have just been like, oh, I need a new £20 stem, and that will be it. That's the end of it. You'll do that at home. Any kind of home mechanic, I think, is capable of doing that. I don't think you can expect someone to reroute, possibly do their whole brakes all over again, because you'll need to rebleed everything if you've got integrated headset, cabling, everything. That's not really a normal home mechanic job, and I don't think it's necessarily being told. It looks very sleek, but it's not nice to do at home.
So yeah, some designs are better than others, but yeah, I think fundamentally too much of the bike industry progress at the moment is on like fancy new features and technology, and not enough thought being put into long-term ownership. Like I think genuinely the bike industry is following down a pretty dangerous path of obsolescence, and a lot of these parts are probably only built with a 3 to 5 year life cycle in mind. And I really think that's quite gross. I think bikes should last 10 years and minimum. And I think, a bike from 10 years ago is still very easily serviced, but a bike from today in 10 years won't be. And I think that's a fundamental issue that everyone should be talking about and everyone should be raising awareness on. And I applaud the brands that are starting to notice this and reverse it where they can. So, I really, Specialized is guilty of the exact thing we're talking about, but at the same time, they also have bikes that are solving it. So, giving the consumer the choice to buy a bike that can be serviced 10 years from now, I think is important, and see where the money goes and, follow that trend.
Yeah, Suvi, you brought up a good point, actually, and something that I maybe should recommend or would recommend, those wearable parts, things like headset bearings that are proprietary or unique suspension bearings. If you have a mountain bike that has some bearings that will inevitably need to be replaced at some point, I would always gather up like a replacement round, if you will, of those service parts when I would get a new bike, and have them sort of squirreled away somewhere for when the time comes, in case finding them becomes challenging because they change the specs so often, especially unique headset bearings. Those can get quite unusual and different. There are many that are shared standards, but some are not, especially Scott bikes, which is what I was using recently. So I would actually keep and recommend others to maybe be mindful of this and try to do the same to some degree. If you do want to have a bike that's current and keep it for a while, just knowing that this is an unfortunate reality. It may be prudent while they're still available from the manufacturer and easy to find, to go ahead and just invest in those on the front end, knowing you'll need them someday, because when the time comes and you do need them, who knows if it'll be as readily available as they might be now. So that's just a little hot tip for you. But yeah, it's something that that's sort of an adaptation to the state of the industry, but it's an inevitable situation that everybody's going to eventually need to have these parts. So why not go ahead and get them while you can?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good tip. So yeah, thank you, Mike, for the very thought-provoking question. If you want to submit your question for us, you can do that at escapecollective.com/hello. And you need to be a member for that. So that is a good reason you get to be in the pod if you become a member and ask a question. And all you need to do is to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and then just ask the question, preferably in a brief format.
Just a few quick tech bites as well to add. So before we wrap up, in the mountain bike world, we've seen a bunch of new lightweight e-bikes coming out. So this is a big trend at the moment. And yeah, I think we're going to see an increasing amount of like higher powered, lower weight e-bikes. And yeah, I think the super light categories and the full high powered categories, I think will eventually or increasingly converge on each other. So two new bikes to be aware of: Rocky Mountain Instinct Powerplay SL, 19.5 kilograms for the top end model. It's got 150 mil travel front, 145 rear. This one's got a 480 watt hour battery and 65 newton meters of torque. And then in a very similar vein, Merida have the E160 SL that just came out as well in the last week. That's using Bosch's new lightweight SX motor. This one has a little less power at 55 newton meters of torque, a slightly smaller battery at 400 watt hours. That's integrated. You can add an external battery. A little bit more travel. But yeah, it's also 19.5 kilograms for the top end model. So yeah, I mean, this is a bit out of the domain of stuff we normally cover on Escape, but I'm an owner of an e-mountain bike, and I'm seeing a lot of people start to take up this sort of bike. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of parts of the world where there's technical trails and big climbs to get to the descent. So they're a lot of fun. But yeah, anyway, less weight is a good thing in this category. I'll leave it there.
With that, I'll also remind of our daily news that we've been reminding you of, because these kind of quick tech bites are exactly what is in our daily news. So you can get all of that and more escapecollective.com, where you get a lot of member exclusive content as well. So if you're not a member yet, you should. And the website is not a hot mess, as Dave has said before as well. To you paraphrase. Yeah, it's a lovely experience to visit. And thank you for listening this week. That's a wrap from us this week. Thank you, Dave and Brad. I'll go back to Bake Off now and we'll talk next week.
Enjoy. Cheers.